Brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the final solution, and the one I want to urge upon you the most, and that is to build more potent interventions. Build more potent interventions. And we did, a number of years ago, expand our effort beyond skill streaming to something called aggression replacement training, ART. And that's what I want to talk to you about now. Each week, each youngster goes to 3 meetings. The first is skill streaming. What else does the youngster need? He's learning the skill from skill streaming, but as I'm sharing with you, as is true for all the skills training approaches, too often they learn it, but they don't use it. What else should we do? Well, I don't know. Let's watch a kid. We just had a skill streaming session where at the last class of the day, we learned what? The skill negotiation. He did a great role play, and just as he finished getting positive feedback, the bell rang, the day is over, he's going out into the street. Let's watch him. Look, he's getting into a hassle with another kid. What a fantastic opportunity to use negotiation, which he practiced 7 minutes ago. Look, he's reaching into his pocket. It must be for his skill card, right? Wrong. Well, wrong is right, because it's not his skill card. It's a weapon or a fist, and he's back in trouble. In other words, for the skill to generalize, he not only has to know what to do, he has to know what not to do. And for that, we use a program called anger control training. We are the developers of skill streaming. The anger control training program comes largely from the work of Novako and Meichenbaum, and particularly Eva Feindler. Skill streaming groups I shared with you can go on for many months. Anger control can be wrapped up in 10 sessions. In fact, if you want to double up, you can do it in 5 weeks. We usually ask that all 3 parts of ART, aggression replacement training, begin simultaneously, but if you have a very aggressive group, you may want to start with anger control to get things under control and then introduce the other 2 pieces. Before I tell you what anger control training is, we have to find out what is getting these kids upset that they have to control, so we give the kids an anger diary to keep in the form of a hassle log. In fact, in aggression replacement training, we give them folders that have 2 things in them: blank homework reports for skill streaming and blank hassle logs for anger control. And as you can see, we're basically asking them for each fight, conflict, or hassle they have to simply check off where it was, when it was, what the other person did, who that other person was, how they responded, how angry they were, and how it worked out. For those youngsters who don't read well or don't read at all, we have a pictorial version of that. Here on 2 overheads, you see we're basically asking the same thing. When did it happen? Where did it happen? What did the other person do? Who was that person? How did you respond? No words, just draw a little picture. And how did it work out? The procedure, by the way, looks very much like skill streaming. You, the trainer, will do the first step and have each kid do it. And then this next week you do step 1 and 2 and have each kid do it based on their hassle logs. So let me show you what it is. Lesson 1, triggers. What sets you off? Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear here what we're talking about. Hostility is a personality trait. You never see hostility. It's an inner disposition to get angry a lot. Anger is an emotional state driven by what we say to ourselves, our cognitions. You don't see anger, huh? You only see one result of anger, aggression. So hostility is the trait, anger is the emotion, aggression is the behavior. Okay? Got that clear? I know you folks, when you get angry, 90% of the time, you deal with it in ways other than aggression. You might sulk, you might problem solve, you might withdraw, but the kids that brought you to this workshop far too often deal with their anger with aggression. That's why we want to lower their anger. And anger control is simply going to be a matter of teaching them what they're saying to themselves that help make them angry, because it's self-statements that generate it, calming them down and teaching them new things to say to themselves. That's what we're going to show you now. So lesson 1 is triggers. What triggered your anger? There are 2 types of triggers, external and internal. External are things that other people do. Internal are things you say to yourselves. I have a big surprise for you, boys and girls. It's almost only the internal trigger that gets us angry. Kids start to raise their eyebrows a little. Let me give you some examples. Rob, do you remember last week when you pushed Harry down the stairs and you had all that trouble? Let's talk about that. You were standing on the line in the cafeteria, first on line, for about 10 minutes. You wanted to be first. And just as the door opened, he jumped in front of you. You pushed him down the stairs, right? What's the external trigger? Harry's jumping in front of you. What's the internal trigger? What did you say to yourself? Rob says, what do you mean what I say? I didn't say anything to myself. He jumped in front of me. I pushed him down the stairs. Well, even if it took a fraction of a second, you interpreted that behavior somehow. No, Rob says. I couldn't have. There was no... Well, let's help Rob. What might he have said to himself? It's a hard concept for all of us in this room to get, because we always think we're angry because of what the other person did, not how we interpreted it. And for kids who are externalizers, nothing's their fault, it's even harder. So we have to help the kids. So there are external triggers and internal triggers. Let me give you a concrete example that I often use to help kids understand this concept a little better. In fact, I'll give you two of them. I work at Syracuse University, which is next to an interstate highway, Route 81. On the other side of the highway is a group of hospitals. Now, I'm driving down the interstate, and I'm about to get on an exit ramp. Car cuts me off. What's that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? The external trigger. Whether or not I get angry, and how angry I get if I do get angry, is a function of how I interpret that. If I were to say to myself, well, it's the hospital exit, the guy must have a medical emergency, I actually wouldn't say that, Sherry, but it's my workshop, I can make up what I want. I wouldn't be angry at all. Second example, same car, same ramp, same external trigger. I say, I saw that guy in the rearview mirror. He's cut off 3 or 4 other cars. Well, on the one hand, he's not just picking on me, but he is endangering my life. I'm getting a little angry at him. Third example, the road rage example. Not uncommon, especially for the kids that brought you to this workshop. That guy in the is trying to kill me. And all kinds of counter-aggressive acts take place. Another fictitious example. Your school has a little extra money. That's the fictitious part, by the way. and you decide to outfit a little recreation room with a pool table and a couch. One day, Johnny is shooting pool, and Billy is patiently sitting on the couch reading a comic book. So he's waiting his turn. Every so often, he looks up to see if Johnny is through with the cue stick. Just as Johnny sinks the last ball and turns to put the cue stick back into the wall rack, Billy doesn't notice because Billy happens to be engrossed in the end of the comic book story. At that moment, by coincidence, Freddie walks into the room to shoot pool. He looks around. One kid's got his nose in a comic book. The other kid's just given up the cue stick. So Freddie takes the cue stick and he starts to walk over to the table to shoot pool. At that moment, Billy looks up and he sees that the cue stick he's been waiting for is now in a different kid's hands. What does Billy say to himself? Does Billy say, a simple misunderstanding is unfolding here? No. Right, not too likely. Much more likely he grabs a stick and cracks it over the other kid's head. Okay? So this business of what we say to ourselves is a terribly important part of the anger. I mean, anger is an emotion, but it's driven by cognitions, how we interpret things. Remember at the beginning of the workshop, I talked about attribution of hostile intent, the tendency to interpret ambiguous events, the bump, the look, whatever. That's what I'm talking about here as triggers. So, lesson 1 is triggers. Next week, boys and girls, please, new hassle logs. Let's look at the cues. The cues are the physical experiences that let you know that what's going on in your body is anger. And we want to teach you this because impulsive kids often confuse the physiological, kinesthetic, proprioceptive experiences that indicate anger with fear, with anxiety. Rob, when you get angry, how does it show up in your body? Give me one example.
Elevated heart rate.
Your heart rate is beating. Okay. Christina, how about you?
I start breathing heavier.
Breathing
faster.
rapid. Maura?
My palms get sweaty.
Sweaty palms. Donna?
I talk in a higher pitched voice.
Voice level changes. Stephanie?
My body gets rigid,
What muscles?
usually my hands.
Hands. Some people for the neck, biceps. Here's 5 people, all angry for the same reason, experiencing it physiologically in different ways. We want you to know that these are your cues so you can then go ahead to lower that anger level. So one thing we do is have this conversation with kids that I've just had with you. Another, a colleague of mine in Kansas, passes out blank figure drawings for the kids to draw on. Here's one example. Now here's a very angry kid. Gave him a blank figure and he draws all the things that he indicates. Okay? So we have the triggers, we have the cues. What else do we need to do now? We know that it's anger. We know that we're aroused. We got to reduce it. And here are some ways in the third lesson of teaching kids how to lower their anger levels. These are fairly standard: deep breathing, deep diaphragmatic breathing, to which you pay careful attention. Counting backwards, 20, 19, 18. Counting backwards, ladies and gentlemen, is not what one delinquent kid told me, turning around and counting to 10. It's not the kid that's backwards, it's the counting that's backwards. Pleasant imagery. Imagine yourself in a peaceful, quiet place. For 85% of Americans, that's somewhere near a body of water. Thinking ahead for long-term consequences. If Rob has a pack of cigarettes in his pocket and I want it, and I grab it and I knock him down and tear his shirt, those are short-term consequences that please me. If I think about doing that and don't do it, maybe I don't do it because I'll go on in-school suspension for a month, okay? That's what I'm thinking ahead. You had a question?
Yeah, that all kind of takes away the immediate feelings. What about like the revenge factor? Like
Good.
I see thinking ahead,
Good.
And to me,
Good.
that's
Yes.
like the revenge factor,
Right.
possibly.
I mean, you know, you see two animals fight. Two dogs have a fight. The next day, they're walking down the street. You don't think one dog is thinking to another, that's the guy I had a fight with last week. I got to go out again. But humans have that quality. We can ruminate, regenerate for revenge, for whatever. So we have to go on. It's not enough to just lower the arousal level. We have to change these internal triggers. And this, as Rob's asking, is the key step. It's called reminders. We have to actually teach kids how to say different things to themselves so that instead of revenge or other forms of aggression, they do, in fact, things like this. They say self-calming things. They say things that lead in other non-aggressive directions. They get more like you guys who handle 90% of your anger in non-aggressive ways. And notice from this list that comes from the work of Navako, things can be said to oneself that prevent aggression from happening before the provocation, during the provocation, or after the provocation. This is a very important list. We can get more of these from the kids themselves. Diefenbacher has come up with a second list of anger-reducing reminders. He calls them cool thoughts, problem-solving thoughts, control and escape thoughts, and self-rewarding thoughts. So, the process then plays out. They had the reminders. We teach them a self-evaluation lesson, which gives them a chance to praise themselves if they're doing well. And remember, in aggression replacement training, each kid each week is also in a skill streaming group. It's usually with different trainers. So we can say, good, Johnny, you've shown us how you controlled your anger. Now show us what you should do instead. From Mrs. Smith's skill streaming class, I know you've learned a half dozen skills now. You pick one of them, bring it together, what you shouldn't do and what you should do. And it would be nice if that's all we needed to do in the anger control area. But as Rob's question on revenge implies, and as our earlier discussion of attribution of hostile intent exemplifies, these youngsters often see the world differently than you and I do. They make a series of chronic thinking errors, perceptual errors. They see the world differently. You come down the hall and someone bumps you or looks at you, I assume you consider it an accident. Someone apologizes. Even if someone's grouchy, they go on their way. But these are very egocentric, self-centered kids that we're focusing on in this workshop. So the bad look, interpreted that way, how dare he look at me? He's trying to make me feel like a wimp. These are the first two perceptual errors. Now, you could let it go at that. That's his problem, not my. Can't let it go at that. I have to defend myself is the perception and conclusion of the kid, because if I don't, this other guy and my friends will think I'm some sort of wimp. And by the way, this whole process is the other guy's fault. So you really need, if you're going to be serious about managing anger and aggression, to do what the cognitive behavioral people do. Now you notice that overhead. It's called cognitive restructuring, self-instruction. This cognitive behavioral movement that's so prevalent in America today, building on skills streaming and skills training and behavior modification, is a way of saying, as I just indicated with anger, that cognitions underlie so much of inappropriate behavior. We not only need to change the behavior, which is the behavior modification people do, we not only need to teach alternatives, which the psychoeducators like myself do, we have to change the cognitions, and here are some ways of doing it. We need to help the kid, more generally, question the evidence. He's relying on one body of evidence to instantly draw a conclusion. We need to have them rely on a different body. So what you see here now is really the essence of what the cognitive behavioral people do. We've discussed it. John Gibbs has, with some collaboration from some of us, in the book Equip. That's one good example of a cognitive behavioral approach. There are others. That's how we deal with the issue of anger management, which is the second part of aggression replacement training. The skill streaming component, behavioral aspect of aggression replacement training, teaches the youngster what to do instead of aggression. Anger control training, we consider the emotional component, teaches him what not to do. And you think we're done. You think we're through. What else does he need to know? He knows what to do. He knows what not to do. I know how to say to Joyce, using a skill from skill streaming, may I please borrow your pen? That was done nicely. I know how to control my anger when she says, no, I need the pen. It still pays for me to lean over and steal the pen. I'm not likely to be punished for it. Most acts of aggression are not punished. Since delay of gratification is not my middle name, I'm not likely to go out and earn $1 and buy the pen. I see it, I want it, I take it. So if we want the behavior, the pro-social behavior, to be longer lasting, to generalize, to transfer, we need to have a third component, a component that deals with values, with the rights of other people. And as you can see, we use moral reasoning training, teaches the youngster why to use the skill. Okay? It has to do with the rights of other people, with fairness, with justice, with principled behavior. That's why there are 3 components to aggression replacement training. We have 2 variations, 2 approaches to moral reasoning training that we've used. They're fairly similar. There's one major difference, which you'll see in a moment. The first was developed by Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg, based on the work of Piaget, has written about there being 6 levels of moral reasoning. And since so many of you work with aggressive and delinquent kids in this audience, I think you'll quickly recognize levels 1 and 2 as being pretty characteristic of most of the youngsters for whom you're responsible. Level 1 is the most egocentric youngsters. I am the universe, and that's it. The heck with everyone else. I see lots of you nodding, so you know who I'm talking about. Level 2 is slightly less egocentric. I am merely the center of the universe. My friends and family matter, and after that, the heck with everyone else. On up to level 6. Level 6, as far as I can judge, is occupied by Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Albert Schweitzer, and I'm afraid not too many of the youngsters who you have responsibility for. Okay? So the question is, how do we move people up in the levels so that they're more moral in their reasoning about interpersonal dilemmas and other challenges that many people face in life? In the Kohlberg approach, the answer is you pose moral dilemmas to the youngsters for them to debate amongst each other. The debate causing a kind of tension, especially if you have people at different levels debating. If Joanne here responds to a moral dilemma at level 1 and Joyce at level 2, and you get them to debate, that arouses a kind of cognitive dissonance or tension in Joanne, and there tends to be movement upward toward the higher level. Happily, it much less frequently does it go the other direction. Let me give you a couple, 3 examples. I ask you to pretend, think of an actual youngster with whom you work. I ask you to pretend that you're that youngster. I'm going to pose a moral dilemma or 2 and ask you to respond the way you think the youngster would respond, okay? The first dilemma is Tony's dilemma. Now, we do about 2 of these in an hour, and we give out the dilemmas for kids to follow along, those who can read. And kids usually love this stuff, maybe partly because we hardly ever ask kids what they think. We're doing that now. The dilemmas are captivating, interesting. There is in our book, Aggression Replacement Training, all kinds of dilemmas for you to make use of, and you may want to do that. You can also look at a daily newspaper any day. There's all kinds of issues, guns and drugs and love and life and death and so forth, that are relevant and compelling for kids, okay? So, boys and girls, please think of an actual kid. Here's the first dilemma, Tony's dilemma. Anthony's supposed to be babysitting his little sister, Michelle. When he's not looking, Michelle climbs a tree and falls out. Situation looks serious. Michelle is unconscious and she's bleeding heavily, and Anthony is really scared. He thinks she might be dying, and there's no telephone nearby to call for help. He picks her up in his arms and carries her to the road. There's nobody else around except for a man parking his car. Anthony runs over to the man, carrying Michelle in his arms, and he asks the man to drive them to the hospital. The man says, "I'd like to help, but I'll be late for work." Anthony begs the man to let him borrow the car, but the man refuses. "How do I know I can trust you?" the man asks. What should Anthony do or say? Well, I'll tell you what he does. He puts Michelle down, he grabs the man by the coat, and he beats him up. He then takes the man's car and drives off to the hospital with Michelle. Kim, should Anthony have beaten the man up to take Michelle to the hospital? Yes or no? What would the kid say?
Yes.
Okay, now we don't care so much about the yes or no. We want to know about the reasoning. Why? Why?
Because he deserved it.
The guy deserved it. Earl, should Anthony have beaten the man up to take Michelle to the hospital? What would the kid say?
Yes,
Why?
to save Michelle.
Save Michelle. Same answer, a yes, but different reasoning. Let's see, we get a third kid here. Mike,
Yes.
you'd say yes also. And
Yes.
why?
Because if he doesn't get Michelle to the hospital, then he's going to get in trouble.
He'll get in trouble. Okay. So you have 3 different levels of moral reasoning, even though they're all the same. You might say to the kid who gave a level 1 answer and the kid who gave a level 2 answer, without giving the numbers out, try to convince each other why you think you're right. So they get into a little debate, okay? And you go like that, a 1s with the 2s, the 2s with the 3s, each time trying to expose the kid to higher levels of moral reasoning. What if everyone gave the same answer? You'd have a dilemma, wouldn't you? You'd have a dilemma. Can't have a debate if everyone's giving the same answer. So you change the dilemma a little bit. If all 3 said, as sometimes happens with this particular dilemma, beat the man up to save Michelle, I might say, what if it is Michelle who's bleeding, but she's not bleeding a lot, she's only bleeding a little? Then should Anthony beat the man up? One of the kids might change their answer, and then we can get a debate going. Or what if it is a neighborhood girl that Anthony's babysitting? She's bleeding a lot, but it's not his sister. Then should Anthony beat the man up? Remember I said level 2, what matters is friends and family? Some kids will say to themselves, well, the hell with it, let her bleed. And again, we can get a debate going. Okay? The most interesting answer I've gotten to this, and I've gotten it from 4 different kids, is beat the man up, put Michelle in the car, and put the man in the car, and take them both to the hospital. Okay? The scariest answer I've gotten is beat the man up, take Michelle to the hospital, come back and kill the man so there'll be no witnesses. Okay? So you can get an interesting range of answers on these dilemmas. I'd like to pose another 1 or 2. Sharon's dilemma. Sharon and her best friend Jill are shopping in a clothing store. Sharon has driven them to the store. Jill picks up a blouse she really likes and takes it into the dressing room to try it on. And when Jill comes out of the dressing room, Sharon sees that Jill is actually wearing the blouse, and Jill walks out of the store wearing the blouse. Moments later, the security officer and the store owner come up to Sharon. The owner says to the officer, that's one of the girls who took the blouse. They check Sharon's purse, there's no blouse. Okay, you're off the hook, but what's the name of the girl who was with you? The officer asked Sharon. I'm almost broke because of shoplifting, the owner says. I can't let her get away with it. What should Sharon say or do? Stephanie, I'm going to tell you what Sharon does. Sharon keeps quiet and refuses to tell the security officer Jill's name. Stephanie, was Sharon right not to give Jill's name?
Yes.
Okay, now, yes or no is fine. What's the reasoning? Why should she not give Jill's name?
She's snitching on her friends.
Snitching on a friend. You don't snitch on a friend. Donna, was Sharon right not to give Jill's name?
Yes.
Why?
It wasn't any of her business.
It wasn't any of her business. Okay. Maura, what do you think?
I think that she should tell him.
She should tell. Okay. So you see, we have some variety here. Okay. Now, most kids will go along with not to tell. Some kids, as Maura said, will say should tell. Get debates going very nicely. What if all the kids said don't tell? You two said don't tell. What if the store owner is a nice guy? Sometimes he lets kids buy stuff even if they don't have enough money. Then should Sharon tell on Jill? Either of you want to change your minds? Well, okay, you don't. What if the store owner is Sharon's father? Then should Sharon tell? You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to put some pressure on you so maybe someone will change their mind. Of course, I can get you all to change your mind by telling you that last week Jill told on Sharon for cheating on a test in school. Now should Sharon tell on Jill? You see, okay. But, so you see the variety of things that you can do. And to highlight just how egocentric many of these youngsters can be, one kid answered, don't tell, and I thought it was like Donna and Stephanie said, you don't tell because you don't squeal on a friend. And when we asked the youngster how come, the youngster said, because later in the week you might get to wear the blouse. You see what I'm saying about the level of egocentricity. Now I know that some of you in this audience have larger groups that easily can get involved in this two-person debate. I mean, the numbers in aggression replacement training, usually the skill streaming is 6 to 8 kids, anger control 6 to 8 kids, and the moral reasoning cut off at a dozen kids. But what if you have 20 kids in your class, 25 kids? Well, we use a somewhat different format, as this particular overhead illustrates. The key aspects of this go something like this. You try to pick dilemmas that easily break out into two opinions. And you physically separate the class into two groups. You see step 6? You get their opinions, and you put all opinion A on one side of the room, opinion B on the other. Get them to elect the leader, and they each give their leaders their reasons, and then the two leaders debate. So if the goal in moral reasoning training is to expose youngsters to opinions and rationales and reasoning, moral reasoning, other than their own, that's a way to do it when you have a large group. In the Kohlberg approach, after the debate, we would leave it open. The kids will often say to you, so what's the right answer? And in the Kohlberg approach, we don't give that. We want that tension to keep going. We want them to think about it. Now, in the aggression replacement work that we've put into this now, we've moved a little bit toward the Gibbs approach, John Gibbs approach, which has to do, he calls it social problem solving, we call it moral reasoning training. It's very similar to what I've described to you. The main difference is that we do provide the closure. We push in the pro-social, mature moral direction, and we push the kids away from the immature, antisocial direction. Okay? Let me show you an overhead that describes the Gibbs approach that we've now incorporated into aggression replacement training, and you can scan that. But the key steps are: you give out the dilemma before the meeting, get their answers, and prepare a little table, which I'll show you in a moment, that gives the answers for the entire group. And then when you have the meeting, you give that back to them, that table, and you start discussing everyone's answers, with the general emphasis being, you see step 4, elicit, discuss, and list mature reasoning from the group. You highlight it, you cultivate it, you push it, you encourage it. So those that give the more moral answer you're going to support and emphasize. Then you elicit, discuss, and list the immature reasons from the group members, and you push away from those. You say things like, what would the world be like if everyone did that? What should the person do from the other person's point of view? How would you feel if you were whatever that behavior is? Let me give you an example of how that would play out. Here's the dilemma. Jerry's problem. Jerry had just moved to a new school and was feeling pretty lonely until one day a guy named Bob came up and introduced himself. Hi, Jerry. My name is Bob. I heard one of the teachers say you were new here. If you're not doing anything after school today, how about coming over to shoot some baskets? Pretty soon, Jerry and Bob were good friends. One day, when Jerry was shooting baskets by himself, the basketball coach saw him and invited him to come try out for the team, and Jerry made the team. And every day after school, he would practice with the rest of the team. After practice, Jerry and his teammates would always go out together to get something to eat and sit around and talk about stuff. On weekends, they would sometimes take trips together. As Jerry spends more and more time with the team, he sees less and less of Bob, his old friend. One day, Jerry gets a call from Bob. Say, I was wondering, says Bob, if you're not too busy on Thursday, my family's having a little birthday party for me. Maybe you could come over for dinner that night. Jerry tells Bob he'll try to come to the party, but during practice on Thursday, everyone tells Jerry about the great place they're going to go after practice. You're starting to get a sense of what the dilemma is now? So we start asking the kids questions. Should Jerry go with the team? Go with the team or go to the party? What if Jerry calls Bob from school and says he's sorry, but something has come up and he can't come over after all? Then would it be all right for Jerry to go with the team? And we ask the kids to answer, go with the team, go to the party. What if Jerry considers that his teammates may be upset if Jerry doesn't come, that they might start to think that Jerry is not such a good friend? Then would it be all right for Jerry to go with the team? And so on, down the list of questions. So we take that list of questions and answers, we prepare the table, which looks like this. In the column on the left are the names of the kids in the moral reasoning group. The question 1, which I read to you, here's their answers. Some say party, some say team. Okay? And you circle what the group's majority decision is, and you do that for each question asked. That's what's presented to the kids. And in the moral dilemma discussion then, in which you use this table, you push in the pro-social direction, you push away from the anti-social direction. So we have 2 approaches to moral reasoning training, which combine with the skill streaming and anger control to form aggression replacement training. We've been studying aggression replacement training, its effectiveness in a series of evaluation studies for many years, some by us, some by others. There's about a dozen studies now demonstrating fairly nicely what it can and cannot accomplish. I'm not going to go into all that research, but I just want to give you a little flavor for it. The first 2 studies were with incarcerated delinquent youth, some fairly heavy-duty delinquent youngsters, and we got good levels of skill learning, good levels of anger control, some pretty substantial changes in pro-social directions of their behavior on the units, which encouraged us to go ahead and do studies like this one out in the community. Now, these are youngsters who were incarcerated, now moving into living in their respective communities. 3 conditions in this study. Condition 1, the delinquent youth got aggression replacement training, and so did their family. Remember the systems approach that we've been focusing on. As a matter of fact, there were 3 groups each week, 1 for the delinquent youngsters, 1 for the parents, and 1 for the younger siblings. We have the aggression replacement, skill streaming, anger control, so we're down to age 3 now, so we can, instead of having babysitters for the younger kids, involve them in this approach too. The second condition, delinquent youth got aggression replacement training, not the family. Third condition, nobody got it. Now, as is true for many studies, the results are not only interesting, and we'll get to that in a minute, but how the study unfolded teaches us a good bit. For example, how do you get delinquent youth, now moving back to their own homes, to come twice a week for aggression replacement training, especially in a city that's often hard hit by winter weather, and it was in the winter? Well, we told them before they were decarcerated that they would have to do this as a condition of release. The last 3 weeks they were incarcerated. We sent a van to the lockup to bring them into the city for an aggression replacement session, let them stay in their own house overnight, kind of an extra home visit, and then back to lockup to get them in the swing of going. But you know what? 5 minutes after they're released, they're gone. They don't want this. They're not interested in this. We gave them bus tokens. That didn't help. Sent a van to the house to pick them up. The van driver knock on the front door. The kid goes out the back door. I tell the van driver next week, knock on the front door, drive the van around the back, let him run into the van. The important point here is that we did not get good at getting attendance until we got good at doing what I described earlier, negotiating the curriculum with the kids. Look, you come out of jail, out of a lockup after a year, there's all kinds of adjustments that you have to make. Home, school, work, peers, family. So instead of saying to the kids, here's a skill that we think you ought to learn, we say, how's it going? Your name is? Janice. Janice? How's it going, Janice? How's it going, Joyce? What's happening with you and Mom and back in school? And out of that discussion, picking the skills that the kids feel they need to deal with their now community life, you get good attendance. What about the parents? You know it's difficult for low-income parents to come to activities like this. Have all kinds of real-life dilemmas and difficulties in getting out, sitters, and away from job. That parent group in this project was the single best social service activity I've ever had anything to do with. And I won't take the credit for it. I'll give it to the social workers who ran that parent group. That parent group lasted 3 years, even though the project lasted 2 years. They did their own recruiting. They had a speaker series. They had a photo album. They went on picnics. Why was it so good? It was good not only because isolated people were coming together and felt some camaraderie, but it was also good because the social workers started the meeting not by saying, here's a skill you need, Mama, you better learn it, but by saying, how's it going? What's happening out there? And Mama might say, well, I know we're here to talk about our kids at the youth division, but you know, I got 2 other kids at home, and they just won't listen to me. And the more I smack them, the less they listen. I don't know what to do with them. Well, let's look at the skill list and see what skills have to do with disciplining kids. And if you give Mama, the customer, we talked about that, something that the customer can use, they're going to not only voluntarily come back, but eagerly come back, which is in fact what happened. The results of this study, as I say, had many aspects to it, but the main result that matters these days is recidivism. Recidivism. We're talking here about the fact that unfortunately approximately 70% of youngsters who commit crimes will, on an average of 9 months after being released, commit another crime. 60% will be rearrested, and 50% will be reincarcerated. We were only able to follow these kids for 4 months. Well, look what happens after 4 months. If nobody got ART, 43% were already rearrested. If the kid got ART, but not the family, 30% were rearrested. And if they both got it, only 15% were rearrested. And what's interesting about that is 4 separate studies have now demonstrated the same outcome. The one I just showed you involved ART for the youth and the family, 4-month follow-up. If they both get it, 15% rearrested. If neither get it, 43% rearrested. The second study involved the youth and his peer family. This is our study of 12 Brooklyn youth gangs. 6 got ART and 6 didn't. And once again, by the way, the interesting thing is not just the results, but the innards of the study. How do you get youth gangs, especially the whole gang, to come in for ART? Well, we worked with people who run agencies that already had good relationships with gang kids. But what was fascinating about this was that the 2 main agencies that were involved in getting the gangs in worked in very different ways. You know about carrots and sticks. One used the stick of you will come in for ART or you will go back to lockup. That's a pretty big stick. The second used the carrot of optimistic expectancies. That was the agency I mentioned before, that we're here to work so hard, we think you can do it. They had better attendance, the one with the carrot, than did the one with the stick. And we got the same result on an 8-month follow-up. Rearrest rate, the kids who got ART, rearrest rate, the kids who didn't. And the third study, a 12-month follow-up, same result. Here, the positive peer culture. I mentioned earlier, positive peer culture is a way of organizing a unit in an institution where the people who live on the unit, the patients, the inmates, whatever you call them, help run the unit, which is a great idea, teaches responsibility and democracy. Unfortunately, with delinquent kids, they too often become autocratic, too assertive. So the Gibbs group combined ART with positive peer culture on a 1-year follow-up and got the same result. And we are now finding in a 4th study, well along, one wave of students already being finished in Erie, Pennsylvania, the same thing, leading to the single most important conclusion of this workshop. And it goes like this. If you want to change that very difficult to change behavior called aggression, you must do 2 things. You must direct powerful interventions to the perpetrators of it. I think ART is one such intervention. There are others. And you must direct equally powerful interventions to the important people in the youngster's life who in many ways hold in their hands the destiny of what you're trying to do. It's not easy to get the parents involved, to get the peers involved, to get classmates involved. But we are, as I said at the opening of the workshop, in the business of small wins. So if you're working with 100 kids and you can only get 15 parents or 15 peers in, do it. It's well worth the effort. Okay? If you're going to start an aggression replacement training program, here are my suggestions for setting it up. I like when a program has someone on site to oversee it. It's far too common in schools and agencies that programs will start with great levels of enthusiasm and something happens. Weren't you running the ABC program? Oh yeah, then you got sick and you got transferred. And the programs start with enthusiasm and they sort of crumble slowly as the demands and exigencies of life take over. If you have someone on site to be in charge of it, to be not only the observer and monitor and organizer, but the cheerleader, it's much more likely to go on. You select your trainers, and in ART, since we know that teachers and youth care workers are burdened, we ask that different trainers run different parts of it. These 2 might run the skill streaming, these 2 might run the anger control, these 2 might run the moral reasoning. So yes, you are involving 6 of your staff, but only for 1 hour each. Okay? Read the book, Aggression Replacement Training, get your kids involved. Do get involved in this aspect of negotiating the curriculum with them. Let the master trainer oversee things and serve in that cheerleader role. Let the 6 trainers get together on a regular basis to supervise each other. The transfer coach. Let me talk to you about the transfer coach. It's a section in the ART book, but it's terribly important. It has to do with the people who are not doing the training, but who are on the staff. Remember yesterday I talked about the bus driver and the principal and the secretary and the lady who runs the food service in the kitchen? We made a big mistake the first ART program we ever had. It was a mistake where we worked in a delinquency center that had 60 kids and 60 staff. Well, we only needed about 15 staff to run the program, so we trained 20, and the program started, and it was going fine. Several weeks into the program, a kid got into a hassle with a staff member whom we had not trained. The kid did exactly what we taught him. He turned away, he took deep breaths, he counted to 10. The staff member said, "What the hell are you doing, punk? When I talk to you, you look at me." That was our fault. We never made that mistake again. When we go into a school or agency, we ask in the strongest possible terms of the director or superintendent, we want your entire staff there. Because if the program's going to work, everyone has to be involved, not just the people who do the initial training, but the people who have commerce with the kids during the day. Who should the trainers be? Well, here's my sort of personal thoughts on what make for optimal qualities of trainers. They should know the procedure. They should have good teaching skills and good group facilitation skills. I think if I had to pick a favorite on this list, I'd point to number 4, comfort with adolescents and children. You know, you can teach skills, you can teach the method, and teaching skills and group skills can be taught, but kids can pick up in a flash if you're easy with them, if you understand them, or if you're awkward with them. The trainer's own social skills and anger control are terribly important. You have to be able to encourage its use outside the group itself, and so on. On this list, I must confess, I see as irrelevant what particular credential, occupation, age, or gender the person has. Kids get beyond that very quickly. Okay? So that's my little pitch to you with regard to ART. I'd like to know if you have any questions about aggression replacement training before we move on to our next topic. Yes, Donna.
What are the goals and outcome of ART?
The ART approach basically has 2 types of objectives. The kind of proximal or immediate objectives is clear from the method: to learn skills, to learn anger control, and to think more morally. That's the steps. Those are the steps along the way. If that's all we do, though, we're not even halfway there. The ultimate goals, the more distal goals, have to do with if the person is more skilled, if the person is better able to control his or her anger and thinks more morally, what are the impacts of that in that individual's life? Are they happier? Are they more effective interpersonally? Are they staying out of trouble? Are they accomplishing in life, school, work, what we hope people will accomplish? So when we do our research, we are rigorously sure to make sure that we include both these proximal outcomes and the more distal outcomes. We want to know if the method is taking, but then we must know if it's having its impact on the kids' real world. Other questions, please. Mary Ann.
Does the moral reasoning training also have homework or logs like the Hassel log in the earlier components?
The moral reasoning training does not have formal homework in the sense of a piece of paper that we hand the youngster, although the youngster may have the dilemma. It has every bit as much homework, though, if it's being done right, in the sense that it's still buzzing, it's still germinating. And it's not uncommon that a youngster, when a teacher, especially in the Kohlberg approach, where we don't provide closure, when the teacher doesn't provide the closure, the kid will go to another teacher, or the kid will go to a parent. We had this dilemma today in school, Dad or Mom, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, what do you think? So in that sense, we try to stir it up so that that kind of homework, in fact, happens.